Within the glass walls of an aviation giant, a newly arrived leader believes she dominates everything she touches, until she discovers that power without humanity is a building constructed on sand. In the basement, a silent employee carries marks that no one sees, and a past that supported the company long before it existed. When a thoughtless action triggers unexpected consequences, two opposite worlds collide, revealing how much pride can blind and how much regret can transform. A story about empathy, legacy, and the courage to change. Hello, my friends. I am Linda, and this is Linda Love Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. The rising sun illuminated the glass facade of the Linton Aerospace building, casting golden reflections that danced through the lobby. Wanda Linton adjusted the impeccably tailored blazer, checking in the reflection of one of the glass doors to ensure that every strand of her dark brown hair remained in its proper place. 23 years old, recently graduated in business administration, and now CEO of a company valued in the billions. The weight of the golden nameplate on her desk still felt unreal. "Good morning, Ms. Linton," greeted the receptionist, with a rehearsed smile that didn't reach her eyes. Wanda responded with a brief nod. She noticed the quick glances the employees cast in her direction when they thought she wasn't looking. It was her first month as CEO, taking over the position her father, Walter Linton, had held for 30 years. She interpreted those glances as admiration, respect, perhaps a touch of envy. "The quarterly reports are on your desk," informed her assistant, hurrying to keep up with her brisk steps. "And Mr. Davenport from accounting would like to discuss the budget cuts you requested." Wanda nodded, without reducing her pace. "Schedule a meeting for tomorrow. Today I want to do an inspection of the facilities. I need to see everything working." The private elevator took her to the top floor, where an entire wall of glass offered a panoramic view of the city. From her desk, she could see the company's jets lined up in the private hangar a few kilometers away. That view always brought her a strange comfort, tangible, measurable power. A constant reminder that the Lintons were not like other families. Since she was little, her father would take her to the company on Sundays when the building was empty. "One day all this will be yours," he used to say, while she ran through the deserted corridors, imagining herself commanding an empire. Now, sitting in the chair that had been his, she felt a mix of pride and a strange sense of emptiness that she couldn't name. 3 floors below the main lobby, in the basement where the maintenance equipment was kept, Mason Ward methodically organized the tools in the metal cabinet. His fingers ran over the rough surface of a wrench before putting it in place. Strong, calloused hands that told stories without words. "And then Noah said he wanted to be an astronaut," Mason commented to Victor, the electrician fixing a nearby lamp. "Now everything at home is about planets and rockets." Victor laughed. "My daughter went through that phase. It lasted 2 months until she decided she wanted to be a veterinarian." Mason smiled, his eyes softening as he thought of his 8-year-old son. "I don't know what will last longer, his interest in astronauts or my bank account buying books on the subject." "It's hard raising a child alone," Victor commented, with an understanding tone. "Hard, but not impossible," Mason replied, his tone firm yet serene. "Every second is worth it." What Mason didn't say, what he never said, was how lonely the nights could be. How sometimes he would wake up with a start, searching for Eliza's body next to him, only to find cold sheets. How on some of Noah's birthdays, his heart broke a little more at the thought that Eliza would never see her son's smile, never hear his laughter. 8 years since she died giving birth to Noah. 8 years building a new life day by day, without letting the weight of her absence crush the small world he tried to keep intact for his son. Mason was 34 years old, but his eyes, when he wasn't smiling, seemed to carry decades more. He had been working at Linton Aerospace for 12 years since his own father had fallen ill and could no longer continue in the role. Joseph Ward had been Walter Linton's right-hand man in the early days of the company, when they were still operating out of a rented warehouse, and the dream of building a fleet of executive jets seemed too distant. It was at that moment, while they were talking about astronomy books and childhood dreams, that Wanda Linton's firm steps echoed down the basement corridor. Mason and Victor immediately straightened up, returning to their tasks. The silence that followed was dense, loaded. Wanda rarely visited that part of the building. "Mr. Ward?" she called, her sharp voice cutting through the air. "We need to check some issues regarding the maintenance of Sector B." Mason nodded, following her down the corridor. He noticed how she kept her distance, as if physical proximity could somehow diminish the hierarchical distance between them. Her questions were precise, technical, cold. There was no room to breathe between them. Her eyes never really met his. They always seemed fixed on a point just above his shoulder, as if looking directly at him required an effort she was not willing to make. When the inspection was over, she made a note on her tablet and turned to leave. It was at that moment that she heard the last fragment of the prior conversation. "Do the shopping after picking Noah up from school," Victor was saying. "It's hard to balance everything when you have a child to raise alone." Wanda paused for a moment, her body tense like a violin string about to snap. Something in those words triggered a switch inside her. She turned slowly. "Personal difficulties are no excuse for below-expected performance, gentlemen," she declared, her voice as sharp as thin ice. "If the work here is interfering with your domestic obligations, perhaps you should reconsider your priorities." The silence that followed was heavy, almost palpable. Victor stared at the floor, but Mason held his gaze steady, not in defiance, but in serene dignity. There was a quietness about him that somehow troubled Wanda more than any sharp response would have. "The priorities are very clear, Miss Linton," Mason finally replied, his voice calm, "and the work has always been done as expected." Something about the tranquility of that man irritated Wanda deeply. It was as if her sharp words had ricocheted off an invisible armor, not of arrogance, but of a kind of peace she did not understand. The next morning, Wanda decided to visit the hangar. The jets from Linton Aerospace were her pride, perfectly designed machines that represented everything the company symbolized: power, precision, exclusivity. The smell of fuel mixed with polished metal greeted her as the doors opened. Technicians and engineers moved like a choreographed dance around the aircraft. It was then she spotted Mason, cataloguing tools on a clipboard, meticulously checking each item. There was something about the way he worked, completely absorbed, completely present, that made her stop and watch for a moment. Without thinking, she walked towards him. The shadow of the enormous executive jet cast over both of them, creating a sharp contrast between the two worlds they occupied. "Mr. Ward," she called out, her voice strangely loud in the quiet hangar. Mason looked up from the clipboard. "Miss Linton." Wanda suddenly felt exposed, as if she had forgotten the reason for being there. The silence stretched on, uncomfortable. Then, almost as a defense, the words came out of her mouth. "Fly this jet and I'll marry you. This way I believe you might complain less." Time seemed to freeze. Those words hung in the air, cruel in their falsehood, poisonous in their intention. It was a mean joke, a way to establish dominance, to reinforce the distance between them. Mason's face betrayed no emotion other than a brief flicker of what might have been pain, quickly replaced by that same impenetrable serenity. "If you'll excuse me, I have work to finish," he said simply, turning back to his clipboard. Wanda felt her face burn. This was not how she expected the interaction to end. She anticipated indignation, embarrassment, maybe even a forced laugh, anything to affirm her power over him. Instead, she was met with only a dignified silence that somehow made her feel smaller. 3 days later, Walter Linton received a call at his home. Retired for only a month, he still maintained an office at the company and kept up with the major developments. The voice of his former secretary sounded concerned. "Mr. Linton, Mason Ward resigned this morning." Walter felt a tightness in his chest. "Did he say why?" "Not specifically, sir. He just handed in the letter and said he needed to seek new opportunities." Walter had known Mason since he was a boy. He remembered him accompanying Joseph Ward to the company's Christmas parties, a quiet boy with observant eyes. And he recalled painfully the day he received the news of Eliza's death, and how Mason returned to work 2 weeks later with a newborn baby waiting for him at home. Something was wrong. Mason was not the type to give up without a reason. Wanda was reviewing contracts when the door to her office opened without warning. Her father entered, carrying a worn yellow folder. His usually jovial face was serious. "Dad, I didn't know you were coming today," she said, standing up. Walter placed the folder on the table. "We need to talk, Wanda." For almost an hour, Walter spoke. He recounted the early days of Linton Aerospace, when all he had was an idea and debts. He told her how Joseph Ward wrote several reports to help him secure the first loan, how they worked endless nights, sleeping on mattresses in the office to fulfill the first big contract, how Joseph had been more than an employee. He had been a friend, a partner, someone who believed in the dream as much as he did. "And now his son Mason has resigned," Walter concluded, his voice laden with disappointment. "I want to know why." Wanda looked away, a lump forming in her throat. "I don't know, maybe he received a better offer." "Wanda," Walter's voice hardened, "look at me and tell the truth." When she finally raised her eyes, she found not anger, but a deep sadness in her father's gaze. And that was worse than any scolding. I was cruel to him," she finally admitted, the words nearly choking her. "I made an inappropriate comment." Walter opened the yellow folder, revealing old photographs. In one of them, 2 young men were smiling beside a small airplane, Walter and Joseph decades ago. In another, a company Christmas party, with a teenage Mason next to his father. "Do you know why Mason criticizes his son alone?" Wanda shook her head, the feeling that something terrible was about to be revealed growing in her chest. Eliza died during childbirth, complications during the C-section. Mason was left with a newborn baby and no idea how to raise it. Walter took a deep breath. "Do you know what he did?" "He asked for 2 weeks of leave. 2 weeks, Wanda. And then he came back, reorganized his entire life, and never, not once, used his situation to ask for special treatment." Wanda felt as if the ground was disappearing beneath her feet. Fragments of conversations, glances, Mason's quiet dignity. It all began to make a painful sense. "I didn't know." "No, you didn't know," Walter agreed. "Because you didn't care to know. Leadership is not about titles, Wanda. It's about people, about recognizing that every person in your company has a story, struggles, dreams. Joseph taught me that, and I failed to teach you." Wanda felt the first tears burn her eyes. "What do I do, Dad?" "Start by doing the right thing. And then, perhaps by learning to be the kind of leader who deserves the respect you demand." Mason was helping Noah with his homework when the doorbell rang. The small but cozy apartment was filled with books and children's drawings. A photo of Eliza smiled from the shelf, eternally young, eternally present. "I'll be right back, champ," he said, ruffling his son's hair. When he opened the door, he found Wanda Linton standing there, without her usual rigid posture. She seemed somehow smaller, younger. Her eyes were red. "Mr. Ward," she began, her voice shaky. "Mason, can I speak with you for a moment?" He hesitated, then nodded, indicating a small bench in the outer hallway, away from Noah's ears. For several minutes, Wanda spoke non-stop. She recounted how she discovered the truth about her history, how her father made her realize how blind she had been, how her arrogance led her to treat people, not employees, but people, as disposable pieces. And finally, with a choked voice, she asked for forgiveness. "I'm not here to ask you to come back," she quickly added. "I know I don't deserve that. I'm here because I needed you to know that I recognize my mistake, that I'm ashamed, that I'm going to work to be better." Mason watched her in silence for a long moment. There was no anger in his eyes, just a careful assessment. "Who is it, Dad?" called Noah, appearing at the door. Wanda looked at the boy with his big, curious eyes and felt an even greater wave of shame. "It's Miss Linton, Noah. She worked with Dad," Mason explained. "Do you have a rocket?" Noah asked innocently, making the adult smile despite the tension. "Not exactly," Wanda replied, "but we have jets." "Wow! Can I see them someday?" Mason placed his hand on his son's shoulder. "Noah, why don't you finish your homework? We'll talk about it later." When the boy went back inside, silence fell between them again. "He seems like a good kid," Wanda commented. "The best," Mason agreed, a genuine smile softening his face for the first time. "He is everything to me." Wanda took a deep breath. "Mason, besides asking for forgiveness, I want to offer something tangible. The company can provide an education plan for Noah regardless of your decision to return or not. Your father helped build Linton Aerospace. It's the least we can do." Mason studied her for a long moment. "Why are you doing this? Really?" "Because I finally understood that leading is not about power," she replied sincerely. "It's about responsibility, and I failed in that responsibility with you and everyone else." 3 months later, Linton Aerospace seemed like a different place. Not externally, the same shiny corridors, the same gleaming jets in the hangar. The difference was in the atmosphere, in the way people moved through the spaces. Wanda had initiated a silent transformation, starting with herself. She learned to listen more and speak less. She implemented family support policies and invested in employee wellness programs. And above all, she made it a point to learn the stories of the people who kept the company running. Mason eventually agreed to return, not as a favor to her, but as a personal choice. "For Noah," he explained, "to show him that people can change, that we deserve second chances." On a Friday afternoon, Wanda walked through the basement corridor and heard laughter. Noah was there, sitting on a high chair, enthusiastically explaining something about Mars to Victor and other maintenance staff. "And then the rover has to send signals to Earth, but it takes a long time to get there because space is so huge," said the boy, spreading his arms as wide as he could. Wanda stopped to watch, a smile forming on her lips. Mason noticed her and discreetly waved, a gesture she returned with respect. That night, alone in her office, Wanda contemplated the illuminated city through the window. On her desk, next to the financial reports and contracts, there was now a small photograph. It wasn't a corporate photo. It didn't show jets or imposing buildings. It was an old photograph of her father with Joseph Ward, 2 young dreamers at the start of a journey. A daily reminder that companies are not made of metal, glass, and contracts. They are made of people, stories, and second chances. And that, Wanda realized, was the true legacy her father had left her. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.